Welcome back to our grading quick start. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and talk about three different types of grading systems that you might hear about in higher education. So there are three major systems or setups that you're going to hear about with higher education teaching. Each of these has an idea behind it, and it makes sense to evaluate each carefully and determine if they make sense given your course objectives. So the first one I want to talk about is normative grading. So normative grading is one of those things, one of those grading types that you hear about but probably haven't seen in your own experience. In normative grading, all students in the class are plotted on a normal curve. This means that the top, say, 5% get an A, the bottom 5% get an F, and the rest of the students, the other 90%, for instance, are going to get somewhere between a B, C, and D. Now, normative grading does not compare students against a standard or the things that you want them to do and learn, but instead compares students against each other. This can cause a problem where students are able to know the material but fail the course. A student who would normally pass with a C, for instance, may fall into the part of the bell curve that is going to get a D or an F, even though they know more than that, which leads us to a problem of it's not really evaluating what they know, but just how they compare. And we also have the opposite of it. If the entire class is doing poorly, which is always a warning sign that you should take a look at your materials and your lesson plans and your preparation, but it also leads to this problem where you may have some students in the class who really should fail. They haven't produced the work. There's no evidence of student learning, but they still pass because of where they are in the percentages. So normative grading is one type of grading system that is sometimes used in higher education, and you can imagine that there is some resistance to this kind of a system from both faculty and students because it doesn't tell us very much about learning, just about comparing within that group. Now, traditional points grading is the kind of grading that you probably hear about a lot on campus. In traditional points grading, coursework is worth a certain number of points. So, for instance, the whole course is worth 100 points, and students complete things like you get 10% of your final grade based on attendance and participation. Maybe another 20% is based on a final paper. Miscellaneous assignments and homework could be worth 20 points, so on and so forth, adding up to 100 points. In this case, points are measuring the work the student completes, not what they know or could do, but what they've actually done. In this case, students could pass the course because of the work they're completing, but it doesn't indicate that they've mastered the topic. Accruing points is often related to diligence and work effort, but unless you're very, very careful in how you score each specific assignment, it is possible to have students who have mastery of a topic but haven't produced the right work or at the right time, and you could have students who have not mastered a topic but because they're very good at managing their work are handing it in on time and getting just enough points to get by. So traditional points grading is common on campus. It seems to be simple in nature. It seems to be intuitive to us. But to make sure that it's really grading what you want, that it's really measuring student learning, you need to be very careful in how you're going to use it. So it takes a lot of pre-work to get it just right. Now, another type of grading is called standards-based grading. This is not heavily used on our campus, but it's something that you might want to think about. In standards-based grading, students are measured against a set of standards, against a set of markers or indicators of what they should know and do as a result of the class. In standards-based grading, they're judged based on mastery of the topic, as opposed to the work units that they're completing. So students under a standard-based system might be doing homework. I mean, of course they're going to be doing homework. However, the homework they do is done for feedback. to help them improve in their mastery, but not for points. You can imagine that could be an issue for students who really do want points for every single thing that they do. But in this case, that's not how it works. The measurement is of them achieving the standard, and work that they're doing in class and for homework is to help them get towards that mastery. Standards-based grading does require some changes in teaching. It requires changes in mindset on your part and on the student. But what's kind of cool about standards-based grading is that students and their faculty know how they're doing. There's no question of where they fall in terms of their abilities and competence, because every time there's a measurement point, they're being looked at as, have I mastered this or not? Not, have I used the right amount of commas? Or is my grammar good? Right? In this case, it is completely focused on getting them to mastery. Right? So when you're looking at these three ideas or these three systems of grading, three big things to consider. What are the objectives of your course? Really, what are you trying to get your students to know, do, and understand as a result of the course that they're taking? What does learning actually mean within your course and discipline? Okay? Too often we tend to try to shove other disciplines within our own courses. For instance, a psychology course that's also trying to teach academic writing. Think about what learning means, what you want from them, the objectives, and what it actually means to have learned within your classroom. And another thing to consider is, what does your department and program use for their grading system? If your group was using normative grading, for instance, and you wanted to move to standards-based, you might find that that was going to be a very difficult battle unless you can work well with your colleagues and everybody takes on and considers the switch at once. So it does make sense to get to know how other people teaching the same course, working from the same syllabus, are using these grading systems. Now, I did want to give you a little bit more on standards-based grading because it is such a new idea for our campus. So there was a study done by Buckmiller, Peters, and Cruz, and they found in their 2017 study that when students approach standard-based grading classes, they tend to feel apprehensive. They actually did an empirical study that looked at how students went through the adoption of a standards-based graded class. So they found that students are apprehensive about standards-based grading. It worried them because they were used to accruing points. They were used to being rewarded for work units, not quality. In order to help with this apprehension and also allow students to be successful, students needed explicit instruction. It's not enough to give them a syllabus and say, hey, here you go, or to talk about it briefly, but constant discussion of the standards, of how they're being measured, of how they're performing was necessary with a very explicit introduction and then follow up consistently in the classes. Standard-based grading requires more responsibility, critical thinking, and rigor. It supports deeper thinking. It supports harder work ethic. And students tend to take on more responsibility for their education in standards-based grading because it helps them switch from the mindset of, I need to earn points and finish work units, and move towards the, wow, have I actually mastered how to do this task? Or have I mastered this content? Can I use it professionally now? So in the end, standards-based grading and watching a class adopt it, Buckmiller, Peters, and Cruz found that students liked standards-based grading once they got used to it. They felt empowered by it. They felt more confident in their work, and they were better able to direct their own learning because grades were no longer a mystery to them. They didn't get a 92% and sit there and go, well, why didn't I get 100? They actually could sit there and say, here is what I need to work on. Oh, and here is how I'm going to. So standards-based grading could give us quite a few benefits for our students. So a few ending notes on this topic. Right? Normative grading is not common in our university. You are probably not going to come across many instructors or any programs that use this as their typical grading scheme. Traditional points grading is common on our campus. The majority of our programs use this. It appears to be simple. It is accepted by everyone, but it requires a lot of work to make sure that you're actually measuring what you want to measure instead of measuring things like compliance. And it risks students passing courses who haven't mastered work. And it risks students failing your courses who have mastered the work but for other reasons didn't complete all or some of their assignments. Right? Standards-based grading is not commonly used on our campus, but it has promise for helping our students, specifically because grades should have meaning, because we should clarify our purpose for grading, and students benefit from multiple chances to demonstrate their learning. That's something I didn't mention before. One of the cool things is that in standard-based grading, you can allow multiple attempts for students to demonstrate their learning. They could be multiple redos of the same thing, or they could be totally different projects that just happen to take each other's place. So, again, you do have academic freedom to choose your grading within the requirements that your department has for your course. These are 3 things that you may hear talked about, but you want to sit down, think through the benefits and some of the risks of each of these, and keep in mind what is it you want from your students, how your grading policy and your system is going to help you get there, okay, and how you're going to know if you and your students have succeeded.